I am cautiously optimistic about the prospects of the success of the Africa Agenda 2063. Like His Excellency has said, we have everything we need to make it work. What we now need is implementation, more action. So we said, and I know we use this as an excuse a lot, that this is a 50-year plan, but we do it is broken into 10-year plans, and we have just completed the first 10 years. The onus now lies on us and on our regions to look at the past 10 years. What has been done? Where are we backsliding? And what can we do to make sure that the next 10 years is not devoid of practical action?
When you look at it differently, that same idea of state interest is partly the reason why we are still not making a lot of progress like we wanted to, especially right from the 1963 till now. Leaders and nationalist leaders wanted to be in charge of what happens in their country. So when others were very much interested in federal government, the others were very much not interested in that, because it's very important for them to steer their country. So it is very difficult to kind of think about it in that way. But then again, I think that even though there is this idea that the framework was done out of consultation across board, a lot of people were consulted, I think that it still comes across as some sort of elite paper that really lacks integration to the grassroots. And that is the problem we have with many of these policies, because people, the ordinary citizen does not really feel the relevance of the continental trade framework, for instance, because most of it, a lot of times, I think one of the key things why people like Professor Adedeji was very much interested in the Economic Commission for Africa was because of the idea that we have a lot of informal relationship across Africa because of the way our borders are. And once these informal relationship and informal transactions are formalized and taken advantage of, these big projects like continental free trade agreements can just spring up from it. So it will become more organic than a top-down approach.
Last week, I read an article where it's such a shame that of all the aspirations or the flagship programs, including silencing the gun, it just didn't go out of anywhere apart from that Addis Ababa office. Where did all these things go? What happened? We had the whole campaign, monies were sent, countries were taking their taxes to the AU. Let's agenda silence the gun by 2020, agenda silence the gun and this is the time where Africa is experiencing the most violence. Coups are happening like we are having dinner. Every day when you wake up, some African country is serving you hot. Cool. Something is going on.
As time goes on, a lot of countries are having debt-linked loans from China, which if they cannot repay, China owns a part of their port, a part of their natural resources. So this colonialism is something we might see from China in the next 10 years. How are we preparing for that?
Hi everyone. So our time is up for the conference to start. We are 4 minutes into it, and if we can please just wait for the next 2 to 3 minutes to see who else will be joining, that would be nice. I think we are all in very different time zones. For those of us in the UK, it's 8 p.m. For those of us in the US, it's 7 p.m. No, 3 p.m. And for those of us in Ghana, it's 7 p.m. And I also know that it's Saturday and people are probably just coming back from all sorts of places. All events are happening today. They happen today. So yes, I appreciate the time for being here. It means a lot to all of us. Thank you so much for coming. So yes, if we just allow a bit more time, maybe a minute or two or three. I promise you about 5 minutes, and then we should just get kick started. And thank you all for coming and for being here. In the meantime, we're just going to engage the people present a bit. So my name is Kakra. My English name is Mary, really, but I do not like to use Mary because I'm a Pan-Africanist, and yeah, I like to go full African. Okay, my name is Kakra Dansoa Danso. Danso is my father's name. Dansoa is the female of my father's name. That is how patriotic my father was in terms of naming his children. So yeah, my name is Dansoa Danso, and I'm from Ghana, proud Ghanaian, proud Pan-Africanist. Most importantly, proud to be a woman. Okay, I'm proud to be a woman. So yeah, that's just about me. I could call on anyone at all. If the if the environment is convenient, you just and if you could, please humbly unmute yourself for a second and just tell us about you. Today is the celebration of the African Day. Most of us here are Africans. We have people connecting from everywhere across the continent. We have South Africans here. Petro is South Africa here. The majority of the people now are Ghanaians. I'm hoping that our other colleagues will join. There's a Nigerian. Miss Chogo is a Nigerian. She's here. And there's who else? Yes, there's Nigeria is representing, Ghana is representing. Oh, there's a friend of mine from Peru. That's nice. Peru is representing, yes, of course. Somehow everyone traces their their roots back to Africa. So yes, you could be from Peru, but you're so very African. And please, Africans, we don't reject anybody. We accept you proudly. They are also here. Thank you all for coming and for making the time. I could just call on anyone at all. Then you tell us, how do you feel about being African? Really, it's just as simple as it is. I know there are people who are not proud to be Africans. I know people who do not want to have anything to do with the continent at all, minus their melanin, the color of the skin that gives them out. They would say they are not Africans. They don't want to have anything to do with the continent. There are those type of people, and there are people like us who would always be proud to be African. I'm just noticing my my signet is Africa. I I didn't know. It's not intentional. It has nothing to do with the day. It just happens. I'm just wearing this. So please don't say anything yet. Don't say anything yet. So yes, thank you very much. So I would just call on anyone at all. If your environment allows you to call. Since I said I'll call on anyone, everybody's phone is going on. But yeah, that's fine. And Petro. So I know Petro. Petro is an artist. He's a South African artist. He does music and poems. A very great, talented young African. Petro, today is the African Union Day. How? What does it feel? How do you feel to be African? If you can say it in just a second or two.
Hello, hi, hi everyone.
Hi, Petro.
Um, well, it feels good to be here tonight to celebrate Africa. I'm a poet. I'm Congolese, by the way. I'm Congolese poet, residing in South Africa. I guess that's why you assumed I'm South African, but I'm Congolese. Yeah, and to respond to your question, to feel African is to feel special. Um, Most people today feel like to be African is to be ashamed, is to be miserable, to be portrayed as poor and unintelligent. But to me, it's the complete opposite of that. I've been raised to love Africa, to embrace our African culture and everything that comes with it. It's be it the color of our skin, be it our beautiful hair, or our love for humanity, our compassion, our solidarity, and our unity, which we fight for as Africans, to always want to stay together. It's engraved in our nature to be close to each other, to be the idea of family, the idea of Ubuntu, right? That I am because you are, right? That's Africa. That's Africanism. That's all we are, and that's what we're trying to go back to. Us as Voice on Africa, and us as Retail Africa. So I'm proud and glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Petro. So Petro happened. Sorry, I didn't know you're Congolese because you are in South Africa. I assumed you're South African, and you look South African.
Right.
Though. Yeah.
Yeah.
Credit to Congo. Good job. You just used a word I actually like, Ubuntu. I remember when I was doing my first master's degree, they used to call me Ubuntu. My friends used to call me Ubuntu because I think I wanted to do my thesis on Ubuntu. And then the idea of Ubuntu, like Petro said, is I am because you are. And that is the theory that underpins Pan-Africanism or African nationalism. That the African, one single African, can't do much without the African. It comes to say that shared interests, we have shared stories, we have shared commitments, and we do have a lot in common. The tapestry of our culture is what makes us so unique as civilization from Europe or from the USA or from every other civilization that there is, or race that's there is for that matter. So yes, that's from that perspective. I really like what he said, that it is our togetherness and our oneness and our edge to be together that makes him proud to be African. I'm going to call on someone else. Okay, so I said I wasn't going to. I told myself I was going to try not to mention people's names and tell you people how I'm related to them. But there is a man on the conference called Professor Ishen. He was my lecturer undergrad about some 10 years ago. That's how far back I finished school. And was he my favorite lecturer? Well, I don't know. I'm not going to say that now. But he happens to be on the call. He's a professor from the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. And he's been a good mentor to me. He taught me a lot of things. And yes, of course, I'm going to credit my being now to him. Somehow he's shaped me a lot in my thinking, in my posture, in my position. If you think I articulate well, it's because of what he instilled in me. All these presentations we had to do. God. Yes, and today we are here. Professor Francis Ishen, I don't know if you are able to speak at this moment, but today we are celebrating African history, and I would like you to share with us, the group, what it feels to you to be African. If you're able to speak, please.
Yeah,
Professor?
to be with you this evening. You are making me blush, you know. Well, good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to be with you this evening. And I just got it right to be part of this evening's meeting. And I'm joining because Kakra has been a thorn in my flesh. I know I've been questioning my life for all this while. And it's great to see her host this show. And I'm very pleased and very happy about her performance and her achievement so far. And it serves as encouragement to other young ones who have very deep sense of Africanism in them and will want to work hard to make Africa a better place to be in. Africa is our home, and we have no other place than Africa, and we must be proud that we are Africans. Our color gives us out, and no continent will accept us unless Africa accepts us. And Africa has already accepted us. We are from Africa, and we are proud Africans. No matter the challenges that we have been going through, or with us now, we are overcomers. We are overcomers. We must be optimistic about the future. Rome was not built in a day, and there has been a lot of challenges for the Western world in time past when they were struggling to be on their own. Now, we are not different from them in time past. All that you have to do and appreciate is that it's a process. And we are laying the foundation for those who come after us to enjoy the fruits of our labor. We should not expect to enjoy the fruit of our labor through and through now. It's not going to be possible. The hope that we should have is that the future generation yet unborn are going to enjoy massively, like what the Western world people are enjoying. Now, back to the issue of Africanism and how do we as young people live up to expectation. It's all about knowing who we are. And I tell you what, many people do not know their origin. Many people have not read histories about their origin. Many people do not know who they are. All that they know is that they are born into this world. But for us to make an impact on this world, young Africans must read their history, must study their history, know how far we've come through, and the prospect of us reaching the sky. Now, there is no point in us giving up now. We should close our ranks and work tirelessly towards achieving this goal. And I know I'm looking forward. And as I have indicated earlier on, I'm proud that Akakra is hosting this show, because that is the job of a teacher. The teacher is supposed to have hope in the students. The teacher is supposed to be optimistic and give hope to the young one. If you're a teacher, you can't give hope to the young ones, then what will be the future of the young ones? So I'm happy I can see you all young ones who are joining the platform to wish Africa the best of luck and everything. I'm happy, and I would like to stay on for a while to listen to the conversation. And if there is a need for me to come back again, I will, with all the experience that I have to share with you, some of the talk. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be with you, and I'll keep watching you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. I know I was a thorn in your flesh. I was a very good thorn, actually, because if I remember all the troubles the other students gave you, it's good. It's good. I brought laughter to you, and that's good. And to say something, he said that our color gives us out. You can bleach all you want, but you're still very African. I mean, unless you bleach your blood, you're still very African. And it's about time we are proud of who we are. It's about time we own up to our stories. It's about time we tell our truth, and it has to be told by us. There's a popular African proverb that says that unless the hunter learns to tell his story, the tales of the hunt will always glorify the lion. No, unless the lion learns to tell the story, the tales of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. And that has been the secret of very great civilizations, their ability to tell their story and to own their truth. They tell it the way they want it to be learned. They tell it the way they want it to be understood. And for most of us who have had the opportunity to travel abroad, you can understand how much they skew the African history. You have people who think they've been to Nigeria, they've been to Togo, they've been to Benin, telling their own part of the African story in a very different way that doesn't represent us. And then when you watch CNN and all these televisions and all that, and the way they represent us, but it's about time that narrative change. We have to own our story and we have to tell our truth. Thank you again for coming today as we commemorate the African Union Day. So we're going to get started. I'm going to introduce the panelists. Everybody here is going to participate. It's a dialogue thing, right? So we don't have professionals, we don't have experts, but we have categories of people here. I can see, I'm going through the list of everyone. Oh, I see lecturers here. I see career diplomats here. I see professors here. I see civil organizations here. I see poets here. And I see people like me. We just fit everywhere. So I'm going to introduce my panelists. These are the people who are going to front the conversation. It doesn't mean that the rest of us are going to be left out of it. At any given point, anyone could express what they want to say or how they feel. But these are the people that are going to front the conversation. So first we have, I'm going to say it as he said, his name is Professor Tiao. He is currently with the University of Swansea in the United Kingdom. He says, I shouldn't call him professor or doctor. He feels it's too big a title. But I feel anybody who has finished a PhD deserves the accolades. Okay, that journey is not easy. So Professor Sian from the University of Swansea has a background in international relations, PhD from the University of Royal Holloway in international relations, and now teaching at the University of Swansea international relations. I personally learn a lot from him because of my background in international relations too. So every time he's on the panel, I get excited because of the perspective he brings on board. So Professor Sian, it's an honor to have you here today as we celebrate the African Union Day. The second person is someone who also mentored me when I had a short time with the Ministry of Ghana's Foreign Affairs, Mr. Edward B. Thompson. I'm trying to describe him. He's very quiet, really. But he's also very deep with his staff. He knows his way. He is a career diplomat with Ghana's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, serving now as a career diplomat and a foreign service officer with the Ghana mission in Libya. He's worked with the ministry for as long as I can remember, and he's both a policy analyst and then a policy advisor. He does a lot in terms of foreign policy analysis, economic analysis, analysis. And today he's also here to share his expertise, his experience in our conversation, of the African Union state. The third person is female and Ghanaian. I'm happy she was able to make it. At the beginning of the week, I wasn't sure if she was going to make it, but eventually we were able to get in touch, and her name is Miss Shogu. Miss Shogu is a Nigerian. She is a Pan-Africanist, or she identifies as a Pan-Africanist, but her main sector is the energy sector. She is a social and economic development specialist, now working with the energy sector in promoting renewable energy friendliness to the communities and the people that benefit from energy. She really desires to be part of this conversation because she has so much to contribute to the African Union agenda. So thank you all panelists for being here, for making the time, and for coming to share your thoughts and expertise on today's conversation. Besides that, there's everyone else. I'm scrolling through, there's everyone else here, and then it's an honor and a privilege to have you. Why are we here today? We are here to celebrate the African Union Day. That is something that, well, now it's called the African Union. Before, it was the Organization of the African Union that was created in 1963 by 32 African countries that had gained independence. The main aim of the Organization of the African Union was to fight for the total liberation of the African continent and then to push for the unification of Africa. And that was where Pan-Africanism became a thing. Most of the African leaders that had gone through the struggle of colonization were now trying to, solicit for support from other African countries to come together to organize our own selves, to fight for our own selves, to become our own people, and last and also importantly, to make a representation in the international arena. Sometime down the line in 2002, the name changed from the Organization of the African Union to the African Union, which now has a member states of 54 African states as part. And Sudan, I think, was the last to join the group. And now the African Union has an agenda. That is Agenda 2063. This is a plan or a flagship program that is supposed to be projected in the next 50 years ahead of Africa. And that is something they've tagged as the aspirations of the Africans. It is believed that they came about this agenda from 2 years and more of consulting every stakeholder that could possibly matter to the project, from children to women to academicians to political leaders to religious leaders to think tanks to minority groups to whoever this agenda mattered. So it is believed that the agenda represents the desire of every African group. And this is the Agenda 2063. 11 years down the beginning of the agenda, there are lots of questions. Is the AU again going to be another failed attempt at the UN, or what do they call it? They've had very different mocking names for it. What have we done in our quest to give Africa or Africans what the African people want. The mission of the AU agenda is that an Africa that the Africans want. So it is supposed to be an agenda forced by us, funded by us, worked by us, and done everything by us. It is an agenda for the African, by the African. And it's believed that every aspiration, there are 7 aspirations, every aspiration is the ideal aspiration for a single African, irrespective of the region where you find yourself, whether in the Sahel, in the eastern, the northern, or the southern of Africa. We share the same things. So this is what the agenda is about. Today, as we mark the African Union Day, we are going to discuss largely the AU Agenda 2063. I'm going to start with Professor Siam. 11 years since the beginning of the agenda. Last year, we celebrated 10 years of it. And it was a mockery to think that 10 years is gone and all we have is policy papers. And this is a very challenge of Africans. We are able to put policy together. But as to whether we implement the policy, that's a very different conversation. So is the AU Agenda 2063 going to be another beautiful document that is just going to sit at the head of the AU mission for God knows how long? Or is going to go? Professor Snell, can you please share your thoughts on it?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you very much for arranging this event, and after all the troubles you've caused, thank you for still pushing me on here. But yeah, I think for someone who is interested in ideology, I think that is where I probably will start from, with the idea that yes, Pan-Africanism was and has been the foundation for what a lot of people, including early nationalist leaders, tried to think about the kind of Africa and the kind of Black diaspora they wanted to see. But then I think that just like any other ideology, there hasn't been much agreement on what actually Pan-Africanism means. Although the AU has a definition for it, it's still very too broad to a point where people take different aspects of it. And if that is what is shaping the Agenda 2063 framework, clearly I am expecting that there are aspects of the framework that probably may not really fit, people may disagree with, and some that will probably instigate some form of lack of political will because of that diverse interpretation of what Pan-Africanism means. Because if you go back to even as far back as the formation of the African Organization of African Unity, if you look at the speeches that were given there, you could see that although a lot of the leaders, or almost all the leaders, wanted some form of integration, there was no direction, there was no clear direction. And I remember a lot of spite between, I'm saying I remember as if I was there, but I wasn't there. Between Nkrumah and Petro Mbwanya, and particularly, of course, the much started the Casablanca and Monrovia group about the kind of future we want for Africa. So yes, to make it quite simple, yes, I think that the framework is conceptually Pan-African, but then I think also that one of the major flaws in the framework is the assumption that, and even when you go to the AU website, it's still there, one of the assumption that colonialism has ended and we have to move on. That is, I think, it's a foundational error of trying to kind of forget that when physical occupation ends, the impact of that previous physical occupation doesn't end there. So if there is a framework that assumes that colonialism has ended and not acknowledging the new forms and the new kind of trajectories it's taking, then that framework is kind of very weak to some extent, particularly because of the history we have. And even though I think that the AU as we have now has been very good to some extent in doing in its approach to regional integration and the way it is trying to link other African countries, and particularly with the Continental Free Trade Agreement stuff. Yeah, I think it is doing well, but then I think there is something fundamentally challenging with the framework, and if that is not worked on, I am not sure how far that the framework could go. I don't want it to end like the Lagos Plan of Action ended, because we've had several other frameworks. And so, yes, basically that's what I think about it.
I remember when I was pursuing my master's program in GIMPA, I had, it wasn't an argument. I was having a conversation with my professor. Then he said, "You don't argue with the professor." So I'm trying. I'm really trying not to argue with the professor. Until you have a PhD, you don't argue with the professor. I think I agree with you. I agree with what you said, especially when it comes to the definition of Pan-Africanism. Even the origin of it. Some people have argued that the idea of Pan-Africanism didn't even come from Africa. It is one of those things that Africans adopted and we are fighting for it as though it's ours. Then they come up with words like Sankophiism or Ubuntu, something to try to represent Africa. And the concept is so broad. It is so broad that people pick aspects of it as to how it suits them to make it work for them. So if the underlying or the fundamental theory of the Agenda 2063 is Pan-Africanism, it might be a problem. I have thought about it like the way you've thought about it. Although we are Africans and we identify as a people of shared history and background, our struggles are not the same. And something you also said that we think colonization is over. Well, it's not. We've had post-colonialism, neo-colonialism, post-African colonialism. We've had different names to explain what we are now, the states we find Africa now. And there's all this subtle way that the Western world is still having influence on our decisions, on our policies, and how they want us to run things. So how really can Africa be united if, although we share the same interests, our backgrounds are not really the same in terms of the struggle out of colonialism? Yes, that is something we have to think on. Your Excellency, Mr. Nee Thompson, can you please tell us from your perspective as a practical career diplomat, being with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, worked in different African nations, what is your take from the look of things, from what you've done from where you be, the African Union Agenda 2063? How practical is it? Or is it also going to be another failed Cotonou partnership agreement?
Thank you very much. I'm very happy we are having this discussion at this level. And at the end of the day, it tells us how deep this conversation is going, because normally you have this conversation at the political level. Right. But as we are all getting engaged, it tells us that we are all becoming aware and we are all contributing our quota. And based on that, I would say that I believe strongly that this Agenda 2063 will succeed. Why am I saying so? I'm saying so because, in fact, we have everything to make it succeed. I mean, if you look at the continent of Africa, our main aim or our objective is that we'll be a prosperous, integrated, and peaceful country, or as a continent. And really, we have everything to make it happen. If we talk about human resource, we have it. If you talk about the resources, mineral resources, we have it. Now you are talking about people who will push for these agendas. That one too we have. So basically, what we need is some form of a framework and then an auditing process, a control process that would make sure that all the things we are putting together will be able to achieve it. you would realize that the Agenda 2063, the startup came it started very slowly. And, first of all, the main issue was that we focused on a 50-year plan. And of course, if you have a 50-year plan, everybody relaxes. And there's this belief that even the people who were involved in setting up this 50-year plan will not be there after 50 years. So there's no sort of responsibility. But then you would notice that in 2019, the commission tasked the AU Commission and African Union Development Agency so that they produce biannual progress reports. So now you realize that whatever is being done is being assessed and then it is reported on. So because of that, there is now some sort of action within. So this is done in terms of national, regional, and continental. So every nation will report on what they've done so far as the Agenda 2063 is concerned. And then it moves to the regional, and then it moves to the continental. So there's actually a report to talk about the progress we've had so far. So really, I am sure if we are going by that, we would be able to do so much. And let's not forget that some of these issues or some of these things we are trying to address within the Agenda 2063 are things we are already doing at the rec levels. So basically, now we just have to streamline things and make sure that we are able to achieve the targets. So I'm looking at how to fast track it. Yeah, so I believe strongly that it is something that can be done.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. If you tell me that it can be done, I want to believe you that it can be done. You are the one in the field. You are the practical one in the field. So I want to believe that it can be done. So yes, thank you so much for your addition. The theory of realism explains that it is just very ideal for any state or region or organization for that matter to look inward before they look outward. If you do not look at your own interests and how it benefits you first, and you try to look outward, there's going to be a problem. And this is something that anybody in the field of international relations understands, that states are very realistic. Even organizations and regional blocs are very realistic. They try to consider themselves first. So yes, maybe when push comes to shove, we will put aside our differences and really make this Agenda 2063 work. And then he said that we are actually doing well at the RECs level. RECs are the regional economic groups. So we have the ECOWAS is an example. We have the SADC and EAC and all that. We are all trying at the economic levels to achieve our own sort of aspirations, which when we put together should make a very good interpretation at the organizational level. So yes, thank you, Your Excellency, for your input. So we have the female panelists, Ms. Yogo, a Nigerian sister, and a Pan-Africanist as well. Can you please share with us your thoughts on the possibility or practicality of the AU Agenda 2063?
Thank you so much, Kakra, for being so amenable and flexible and being open and inviting us to this discussion. It's a timely one and an auspicious one since we're celebrating Africa Day today. I would say I am cautiously optimistic about the prospects of the success of the Africa Agenda 2063. Like His Excellency has said, we have everything we need to make it work. What we now need is implementation, more action. So we said, and I know we use this as an excuse a lot, that this is a 50-year plan. But we do it is broken into 10-year plans, and we have just completed the first 10 years. The onus now lies on us and on our regions to look at the past 10 years. What has been done? Where are we backsliding? And what can we do to make sure that the next 10 years is not devoid of practical action? If we look at the aspirations of the Africa Agenda 2063, we have a lot. And the document is a framework document, which means it's all inclusive and it is hopeful. And I will just call on or just remember the words of Pierre Lumumba, who said, yes, the Africa Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, is a dream. Now we all have to wake up and actually implement that dream. And that is where the work comes in. So personally, I think we should look at this, yes, as Agenda 2063, but look at it in batches of 10 years. This whole 50-year issue was copied from the Chinese Communist Party, where they have 5-year economic plans. We've taken this 10-year one on. How can we make sure, as His Excellency has said, and as the previous speakers have also said, make this a positive impact? Have, first of all, the document, which is good, but the auditing framework. We've talked about AUDA, we've talked about NEPAD, but we also have the African Peer Review Mechanism. Are they empowered to actually monitor and evaluate the impact of the work that has been done so far, so that we catapult the continent to the next level? We talk about regional economic communities. And the truth is, within the RECs, there are a lot of challenges that we face. Even if we come down to the level of ECOWAS, in the past 2 months, ECOWAS has been shaken, first and foremost, from potential war, not war, between Nigeria and Niger, or the conflict in Burkina Faso, Mali, Senegal with the constitutional crisis. All this has contributed to a slight weakening of our regional economic blocks and a lack of trust in them. So how can we build trust while also delivering on Africa we want, not waiting for, while I believe, and I will just say this as well as to close out, while I believe it's important to have dialogue and discourse, because I am not a historian and I'm trying to learn and expand my knowledge on African history, but I do like to see action on the ground. So what can we do? As youth today, what can we do to push it forward, to create awareness, to make sure that those at the top know that we are aware of what our rights are, to be able to act on them? So while definition of Pan-Africanism is important, for me, I see a higher cause as domesticating the African Union Agenda 2063 into national plans. Then we can actually start working on it. Because if we keep looking at it as an overarching document that governs 54 states, I don't think we would move that quickly.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Shoma, for your excellent addition to it. Of course, like what you said, if we do not nationalize the agenda, it's not going to be done in any way. And like the famous Patrick Lumumba said, it is a dream. Until we wake up, it will remain a dream. Please do not feel like you're so far away from this conversation. Like His Excellency said, this thing is only almost discussed at the bureaucratic level. We never really know what is going on. Or if you don't go out of your way to find out what is going on within your regional bloc or your continent, you probably will never find out. But we have heads of states and policy analysts traveling all over the world, making decisions for we the Africans, and I don't even know how they're even influenced by what they think we want, whether it's from their background community or from their political advisors. I do not know. But this conversation is not so far from us. Every aspiration listed in it, whether it is in the category of peace and security, development and economic well-being, or just the shared idea of African unity, we are part of it. It affects us as much as it affects any president of any African states or even any external body like the EU. So please do not feel like the conversation is so far from you. You have to be part of it. And like she said, this is how we make an impact. This is how we start. This is not going to end here. This is a recorded conference that will be shared on our websites and our platforms, maybe later transcribed into an article to be published across our local newspapers. Please be a part of it. It affects us. Everything affects us. Until we start talking, we'll never get things done. And that's the problem with Africans. I think very often, apart from Nigerians that I feel are very verbal, most African states are very timid. Oh, they said it's free SHS or whatever. Nobody's going to question any policy. But no, it has changed. If it affects us, we have to talk about it. We have to make people know that we know what they are saying. We understand what they are saying. If we don't agree or we agree. And here she said it's doable. It might be doable. I'm not going to say much on it, whether it's doable or not. I have my own opinions about it. But let's talk about it. Like you said, 10 years down the line, we're in the 11th year since the agenda. And we think we have 40 more years. 11 years just went down the drain so fast. I remember when we started this so fast. And last week I read an article where it's such a shame that of all the aspirations or the flagship programs, including silencing the gun, it just didn't go out of anywhere apart from that Addis Ababa office. Where did all these things go? What happened? We had the whole campaign, monies were sent, countries were taking their taxes to the AU. Let's agenda silence the gun by 2020, agenda silence the gun and this is the time where Africa is experiencing the most violence. Coups are happening like we are having dinner. Every day when you wake up, some African country is serving you hot. Cool. Something is going on. We are having civil wars, civil crimes. The guns are now out. We didn't silence the guns. We actually put the guns out and we gave them to people to work with them. What happened with that? What happened to the free continental trade? Of course, that is done. We have a very beautiful office in Accra for the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. I do not know what else has been done apart from the building. And that is why we are having this conversation. I'm coming back to you, Professor Siang. You are not very sure whether this whole thing is going to work. Of course, you think there might be a fundamental problem with the framework. That is, if we do not put a lot of instruments together to monitor it. 10 years down the line, 39 years more to go. On the aspect of any of the categories of the aspiration, whether it's in the peace and security sector, in the economic and development sector, or the shared idea of Pan-Africanism, what do you think we can do to make it work? How do we wake up from the dream? How do we work it? Professor Siang.
Yes. Yeah. I just to say that I still believe it can very much work. But then, I mean, to focus more on, because I like cultural diplomacy and soft power. But I think that, for instance, the Encyclopedia Africana has been quite successful, although I still want to see it a lot more in African universities, because the funny thing is we end up not learning a lot about Africa in African universities. I mean, for University of Ghana, yeah. You don't, I mean, when you start from level 100 to 400, a lot of the courses you are taught mostly ancient and medieval theories and modern Western political thought. And so I think that sort of integration of African studies into our curriculum through Encyclopedia Africana it's still something that I think it's on the move, and I think can be done a lot better to make sure that at least if you've completed a first degree, you know something more about your history than just mentioning your first president. And I think the museum still hasn't been really successful. I think the last time I checked, they had a temporary thought curtain or something, but I don't know what happened to it. But then generally, I think that there are very clear challenges in terms of what we want to achieve. You mentioned realism, and you looked at it from the perspective of how that will encourage other African countries to actually integrate with one another. But then when you look at it differently, that same idea of state interest is partly the reason why we are still not making a lot of progress like we wanted to, especially right from the 1963 till now. Leaders and nationalist leaders wanted to be in charge of what happens in their country. So when others were very much interested in federal government, the others were very much not interested in that, because it's very important for them to steer their country. So it is very difficult to kind of think about it in that way. But then again, I think that even though there is this idea that the framework was done out of consultation across board, a lot of people were consulted. I think that it still comes across as some sort of elite paper that really lacks integration to the grassroots. And that is the problem we have with many of these policies, because people, the ordinary citizen does not really feel the relevance of the continental trade framework, for instance, because most of it, a lot of times, I think one of the key things why people like Professor Adedeji was very much interested in the Economic Commission for Africa was because of the idea that we have a lot of informal relationship across Africa because of the way our borders are. And once these informal relationship and informal transactions are formalized and taken advantage of, these big projects like continental free trade agreements can just spring up from it. So it will become more organic than a top-down approach. And now what I'm seeing is that a lot of things are happening at the top and trying to send it to the bottom, which is currently not working, because particularly we don't really, a lot of Africans do not assess their leaders on foreign policy. A lot of times we've limited foreign policy to some sort of higher elite thinking, to the point where even when you look at a lot of surveys in Africa about elections, we don't ask about foreign policies, except for in the late 90s where Afrobarometer and early 2000s where Afrobarometer decided to ask people about structural adjustment. So then what that means is that people are not holding governments accountable for some of these programs and projects. And that doesn't really encourage politicians to actually try and build up some political will to make sure these things are operational. So I think that when we carry people along and make them aware that these are the things that are happening on the continent, and these are the benefits that are coming to you as citizens, then the next time the politician goes to campaign, he will be asked questions about what is happening in other countries. They will be asked questions about the relationship they have in terms of border and security and trade relations with other countries, and kind of tend to want to elect people based on what they think about those processes and what their policies are on them. But then until we carry people along in that way, it is going to be very difficult to hold politicians accountable to make them work, because I think one of the key things is the lack of political will, because a lot of politicians don't have that about this. Because why would I want to subject myself, for instance, to African peer review mechanism, allow another African country to come and rate me and tell me that I am doing something wrong? No, I won't do that. Why would they come and give me a mark on my governance? It won't happen. And again, we just have to also acknowledge the practicalities of globalization and the challenges it brings on us, and try and navigate this, because then a lot of the stuff we are doing are very much against where we want to go, because very little of those benefits are coming to us. And so it's quite challenging for these countries too. And back again to the point I made about colonialism. It's still, you talk about conflicts and all these things happening in other African countries, then there's always a Western country or an Eastern country in there doing something. So then until we acknowledge that it hasn't actually ended, and which is the fundamental problem I have with the framework, it's still not going to work. We can't pretend that we are alone. So basically, that's what I think.
Thank you. You said a lot, and then you said that we have to, at some point, start an education, the African education. I think it's part of the Agenda 2063 to start the African education, where the idea is that we'll have like an online portal for Africans to learn about African stuff things that affect us, our history, our policy, and all that. I don't know how far that has gone. Please, I'm not going to comment on it, but I know it's part of the agenda. It's on the flagship program, the E-African University. That is what it's called.
Yeah, I heard some people were enrolled on it, but then I don't know. I think about 40,000 or so.
Oh, 40,000 people?
That's what I read somewhere last year, but I don't know.
Okay. I think it intends to take the same focus as the United Nations University, but this one I think is solely for Africans. If they are really able to run such, in fact, I'll look at it and probably enroll next year, since I like school. And then Professor Siao said we should learn African stuff. It's just a shame that what betides you if you go anywhere and you say I have a degree or a master's in African studies. The way people will look down on you. You had the ability and the opportunity to go to school for 4 years, and of all the programs, it was African studies you chose. Didn't you know about your folklore? Don't you know about your story? You didn't learn about Africa from your grandmother. You chose to spend 4 years of your academic life to learn about Africa studies. It's almost embarrassing. So nobody wants to take the African program course. At some point, it even falls on you. If you do not get the required grades to go and do nursing, engineering, medicine, then you have to take a psychological course, a sociology course, and you have to do Africa. Even at the University of Legon, sometimes it's actually a sub course. You don't do a whole degree in Africa. But it's interesting you have the University of Oxford or the University of Harvard or the University of Princeton doing a whole master's degree fully funded in African studies. But we, the Africans, no way. No way. I remember I told someone I want to read a PhD in African studies. So really, you have 4 years to do a PhD and it's African studies you want to learn about? No. So these are things that we need to reorient our mind. We need to change our narrative. We need to change our perspectives. I mean, like you said, it starts from education. I don't know how else to emphasize that. We need to change the way we see ourselves, especially the things that concerns us. It's very important. And then he said that the idea of realism might also be the reason why Pan-Africanism might be a challenge or not, because still people are very introspective. They look at how things affect them. And then also he said that the struggles of our colonization are not the same. How Ghana came out of colonialism is not the same as Nigeria did or Liberia. So yes, at the end of the day, we all had independence, but there are still things that hold us down. Post-independence of most African states, some states have never had to suffer very severe civil wars like Ghana. Liberia, Rwanda, DR Congo, you can't say same. They're independent states, but they still have things that are holding them down. So yes, of course, we have to make sure that all these things are sorted out before we talk about integration. Although we want a particular Africa, or we want the same Africa, the things that hold us back are not the same. So yes, realism is a reason why Pan-Africanism might be possible, but also a reason why Pan-Africanism might never ever happen. So thank you for your touch on the aspect of Pan-Africanism as the fundamental part or element of the AU agenda. Your Excellency, Mr. Thompson, since you're in Libya, I want to assume you're in the forefront of the peace and security agenda. And I know you've worked on security policies before, looking at, even let's just focus on the ECOWAS and their struggle to maintain peace and order within the ECOWAS regions. I'm not even going to start on the Sahel region. That is too much work. Let me not even start there. Let's do with ECOWAS and their struggle to maintain peace and security. Peace and security is a very key component of the agenda because there is no way you can have any conversation aside or around peace and security. What is the point of unification if there's war? What's the point of economic development if there is conflict? What's the point of empowering our gender sector if people are fighting? It boils down to the idea that you can have your peace of mind and you can be secured. What do you have to say about the AU's aspirations to eliminate or at least reduce the conflict and insecurity that plagues the continent?
Thank you very much. As I said earlier, we have the potential, and once you have a potential, you know that you have challenges as well. As a continent, we are not alone. So As we aspire to get to a certain level, there are others who depend heavily on us. And it is also their wish that they'll continue to depend on us. So we should be aware of all these, and then we take the necessary action. Now, I'm in Libya. But then when you are talking about the crisis in Libya, it goes beyond Libya. You are talking about French interest, you are talking about Turkey interest, you are talking about US interest, you are talking about Russia interest, so it's something that we should be aware that we are alone, we are not alone. And you have all these major countries strategizing and trying to take a piece of what we have. So it is not something that we look at it at face value. Currently, as it is, the US is worried about Russia's presence in Africa. So they've put up strategies to combat that. You go forward, and then the EU too is worried about Russia's presence in Africa. So they have put up a policy paper to address that. So these are information. These are things that it should inform us, so that we also put things together, so that you realize that you can't just have a plan and you expect that it will just go according to the plan. You have to be aware that there are external factors. And I think that that's some of the things we take for granted, the external factors. So if we really want to address peace and security in Africa, that is one of the first things we have to look at. Democracy is good. Democracy is good. But then you have democracy as a system where other countries also use it to influence the political atmosphere within the country. So, of course, you have an opposition. Opposition may be supported by, for instance, in Libya, we have two governments, right? So you have one government being supported by Turkey and other countries. You have another government which is being supported by Egypt, UAE, and other countries. So when you have a system like this and you are not very vigilant, you are not very careful, then foreign parties will control what happens really in the country. And like my sister said, when you check all these coups and all this instability, you always have a foreign hand in it. So I think this is something we need to address strongly if we really want to advance. And then we shouldn't also forget that for the issue of weapons, it's a whole business on its own. And there's a deliberate attempt by producers to sell their weapons. And these are all things that we should address head on. Otherwise, we won't make a headway. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Your Excellency. And that was an excellent input on the peace and security aspects. I think for most African people who haven't had direct impacts or effects of the insecurity that plagues the continent, I don't think they really see the seriousness of the matter at hand. Because the more wars and conflicts we have across the continent, the more chances of having immigration crisis, because people will start flooding into your country. Refugee problems become a problem to everyone else. And then now we have like the incidents where Nigerians decided to say Ghana must go. And then Nigerians, we haven't forgotten what you did to us. Don't worry. We'll come back. We'll come back. I mean, we did it to you people before. So yeah, Ghana must go. It's a thing, you know. And then we have Liberians moving to Ghana and across the continent to, you know, seek refugee status and everything. So yeah, conflict really is a part of it. I'm happy that the last part, which is the economic growth and development, falls to you, Shegu, because you are an economic and a development specialist. Having gone through the 7 aspirations, considering Pan-Africanism as something that might be a challenge or insecurity that might be a challenge to the successful implementation of the 7 aspirations of the African Union Agenda 2063. What's your stance when it comes to economic and development growth?
Wow, that is an amazing question. I think that is what also as we as Africans should ask ourselves, but it's a good question for African leaders when they wake up in the morning to ask as well. Economic development is, I mean, it's sort of like the blueprint that we show to show that we are a nation that is growing, or a nation that actually can provide for ourselves. Africa, I mean, when you were asking the question, Kakra, at the beginning on what it means to be African, my first thought in my head was blessed, because we are blessed with the people, with the human capital. We are blessed with the natural resources. We are blessed that we are at the equator, even geographically speaking, we are quite blessed that we do not have, we do not feel the vulnerabilities of earthquakes and natural disasters. I mean, now that we have the advent of climate change, this is becoming droughts and flooding and natural disasters like that are becoming more and more prevalent in Africa. But we are quite blessed. The issue now is that economic development does not show when you look at Africa's GDP scorecard. You see, if we calculate GDP per capita in Africa, so low. But if we look at GDP of each individual country, if we talk of agricultural production, if we talk of natural resources, from the top of the continent in the north down to the south, you can just list the resources we have. But the thing is, and I was reading up on this, the thing is, a lot of the spending in Africa is on raw materials. We produce raw materials and we export, and we import them at a high cost. As an energy specialist and someone working on the extractive sector, we talk about oil, gas, and mining and the just energy transition and what that means for Africa. A lot of African countries don't want to transition because they are so focused on these resources, not minding the impact of an energy transition on us. We have next year, the EU is going to implement what we call the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. Right. And I would be honest here, I am quite scared about what that means for the export of African raw materials. Right. Today, we produce a lot, Europe buys a lot of our raw materials. Mm-hmm. But then what happens when they tax based on carbon credits, and we don't even have a concept of what carbon credits can do to our production line? Secondly, even if we go down and look today, just on our tax, how much do we tax our goods? How much illicit financial flows are leaving these our nations? Look at the DRC. I'm happy that there's a representative from the Congo state. How much of their raw materials, copper, cobalt, and leaves? So this is the issue where economic development and production does not necessarily reflect on our balance sheet. This is an issue starting first and foremost, if we look at the aspirations on good governance. How do we ensure that we strengthen our institutions to a point where the institutions are divorced from the persons? Because today, people are institutions in a lot of our nations. So that's the first point, institutions. Then there's a very good aspiration that says people-centered development. Right. I completely agree with this part, but again, it should be people-centered, but we should also leverage on technology. I tried to listen, and thank you. I really appreciated the intervention from Dr. Emmanuel Seo on the different speeches of different Pan-Africanists and nationalists at the beginning when the OAU was formed, and how today, how do we reflect on those, and how do we make sure that is reflected in us? The world is moving toward the 5th industrial revolution. Africa is barely getting to the 4th. How do we compete on a global scale, bearing in mind that our resources are used to compete on a global scale, but leaving us out of the equation? So this is not sustainable. This is not sustainable for Africa as a whole. And we know we want an Africa that's prosperous, that is strong, that is influential. But let us start by an Africa that is at least interdependent and not solely dependent on others to come in, to take our resources, to process them, and to give us whatever cost it costs to process the raw material. So this is where I see economic development go wrong. So we have to move from thinking or talking solely about economic development to start to say economic diversification first. How do you diversify so that a drought doesn't affect the whole country's GDP for 6 months? How do we invest in? So we also suffer a lack of investment in a lot of our sectors. Agriculture is being hit terribly by climate change. How do we make sure that we can feed our people? So these are the basic questions we ask, or we should ask. And I think your question, I was struggling to answer, and I think I'm going to re-listen to the recording again just to get your question, because this is something we should reflect harder on, and actually for myself and for us as you reflect on as we continue to conduct our research on how we can play our own part in making sure we get the Africa we want, even if it's just to start from awareness and advocacy before moving into the echelons of power to actually take decisions.
You actually answered it perfectly, though. I mean, you've said things that I haven't even thought about ever before, not even in a long time. I have never even thought about it. And then something you said that let's at least think about it as African interdependency. At least let's start from there. Or let's at least start with advocacy. Let's start talking about it, okay? Because the more you talk about something, the more awareness you create for it. So let's start from there. But really, there's not much we can do if what even happened to the after? There's a nice policy paper, there's a nice building. What happened? You can't freely move stuff from Nigeria to Ghana. It's realistically impossible. So let's at least start from ourselves. How do we help each other? Let's do trade here, let's work it out, and then eventually move it up. You've answered it perfectly. I also have to listen to the recording and draft what you said, because I'm sure one day I'll use it in some other presentation. Thank you, madam. Thank you, madam. Thank you, madam. I see the comment sections are getting very interesting. Mimi is having a good time in the comment section. And yes, I'm trying to read some of the comments, and then we would see how I can't see any of the comments anymore. So from Joe, he says that an Africa that is at least interdependent and not solely dependent on the East or the West. Yes, I think that is something we can work on. That is something achievable. That is something that would work. Are there also any other people in the group who want to contribute or share their thoughts and their knowledge and their experience? Please feel free to put your nice hand up, and then I will call you so that the presenters or the panelists can have a minute or two to relax. Mimi wants to know what is globalization. Okay. I'm not going to let any of the panelists answer this. I'm going to let someone else from the conference section do it. So anyone at all, please feel free. If you know what globalization is and you can explain it to Mimi, please feel free to put your hand up and I'll call you. She wants to know what is globalization. Of course, as Africans, globalization affects us in any way, in some way or in a lot of ways. So yes, it is a relevant question. So please feel free if you know what it is. I don't know why I can't see the rest of the comments. I used to be able to read all of them, but for whatever reason, I think they are cleared. Okay, so can someone please explain what globalization is to Miriam? Oh, I'll pick and choose. This is the classroom, please. I'll call you. If you don't score, it goes against you, and vacation time you will suffer. Anyone to please explain what globalization is? Anyone? Okay, Miss Shogo, can you please help us with globalization?
I can give it a try. So simple, in simple words, globalization is basically taking either a company, a product, an ideology from a national or individual level and going global, going across the world. So it's an idea. If it's something as simple as an idea,
okay,
an idea or a product going global, you can think of it like that.
Like that. Dr. Xiao, please, what's globalization?
So basically, yes, that's what you said. And again, is the idea of increasing interconnectedness among people. I mean, some say it's the new colonization, particularly because of the idea that the assumption is that once people come together through technological development and through a lot of other means, there is a tendency for us to get better and to develop. But then the other side of it is that this coming together has actually not really helped Africa a lot, because it is still skewed towards the West, and it has actually opened up Africa to a lot of unequal competition. For instance, if you look at Africa Growth Opportunity Act, the argument is that Africans are not really getting the most out of it because it's more of US dumping and us kind of sending very little. And so the idea is that globalization has opened us up to very much unequal economic relations with the rest of the world, and that's continuing to make us underdeveloped and kind of stifles our development, basically. Then it goes back to the argument about the fact that there is this book, Kicking Away the Ladder by Hajin Chun, who argues that when Europe and America were developing, they did not develop by opening up the economy. They developed mainly through protectionist policies. That's but then true. We are in an era where we have been fused into a global economic and political system that has opened us up, because then neoliberalism is the order of the day. And this is going to continue to make us underdeveloped, because what happens to smaller companies that are trying to develop? They have to compete with big American corporations. You remember, even in Ghana, when during the MPP era, where Kufuor opened up for the textile industry and also allowed Chinese clothing imports. Clearly, ATL suffered a lot, because no Ghanaian will want to buy ATL products for, say, 100 cedis, while there is a Chinese cloth that will cost like 5 cedis. Nobody will do that. But then, so the concept, the whole idea of globalization is the argument is that yes, we are currently in an era of interconnectedness, but then this connectivity is actually not helping us as Africans. Rather, it has opened us up to unequal competition. And once we continue to be in this system, we are going to continue to suffer until we start kind of building up systems that will protect us from some of these things. And it goes back to the comment about interdependency, because then now it is easier for an African country to go into a trade agreement with an European country than for an African country to go into an agreement with another African country. Even African countries want to be part of European trade agreements, and that is very big for them. But then Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire do not want to be exchanging cocoa products and coming together to build cocoa industries to kind of process our goods. So then basically that's the thinking. So it's up to us to take a decision. And that's why the Continental Free Trade Agreement is good, because then the idea was that it's going to allow us to counter some of these impacts. But then as one of the panelists said, not everyone is happy with that. And then so they are going to make sure that you don't get what you want, because getting what you want means they're not getting what they want. And that's the foundation of dependency theory.
Okay. Thank you very much. I mean, I agree with what you're saying, but I also take a different stance on globalization. Globalization is also the reason why some aspects of our Africanness is out there. Through globalization, our music is shared, our history is shared, our pop, our culture, our lifestyle is now accepted. You have a white person doing full braids or locks, and he asks, I'm a global citizen. If an African can do it, I can do it. Our globalization is allowing us to accept some lifestyles and allowing other people to accept some lifestyles, and then arguing that it's a global world. If it's good for you, it's good for me. There's no me without you. Also, Professor, I'm not going to call you now. Please hold on. Please hold on. Let's read some comments. Okay, so it's so about so someone says, I remember writing a paper on the after, and I was so unsure of what I found published because it didn't seem to reflect reality. Perhaps things are happening on a larger scale and we are not aware of. It's true. I mean, there are a lot of documents you find online that do not seem to be practical, and it makes you ask. And like His Excellency said, most of these things are done at very high political levels, and the people down there barely find anything or the document that supports it. So yes, this is something that happens a lot. You do a whole research paper on the after, and the findings that you are finding do not reflect the reality. How do we phantom that or make that even make sense? And then someone wants to ask Dr. Siao, isn't it Africans don't seem to be competitive enough? So someone, I don't know how this question is related to you. Maybe it might have been something you said that maybe Africans are just not competitive enough. And then someone wants to know if globalization is the same as modernization. This is an interesting question. Globalization is the same as modernization. And then I think we need to teach our kids from elementary school. This is great. She's advising what we should teach our kids, from early ages: self-sufficiency, self-discipline, cultural preservation, energy preservation, time punctuality, health lifestyles, and then support for Africa. This is a very good initiative, and I think everyone should try. And someone says, I really want to know what Africa is united on. This is a personal question. What exactly, aside the common name we share and greedy politicians? Okay, Ronaldo, I think someone has upset you today. He wants to know what Africans really, really share or have in unity. I think there's a lot to that, Ronald. I think there's so much. Well, not all Africans have this dark melanin. So of course, Algerians are not as dark as us, or we are not even as dark as the people from, is it Senegal? Yes, but there's a lot more that unites us. For stats, is a continent that suffered the most from colonialism compared to other continents. We suffered equally largely, although the struggles of our independence are not the same. But yes, there are lots of things that we share. The idea or the theory of Ubuntu or African morals are quite common across the continents. The things that we hold dear, the things we practice, our story, our folklore, from Nigeria to Ghana is similar. We may call it Kukwananse. I found this very interesting. What we call Kukwananse, our stories are practically the same, just different characters that tell them. So we may have African folklore teaching on morality or humility or love, and it's literally the same story, different characters. I don't know. I personally believe there are lots of things that unite us. I think it's quite common. We are probably the most. We have the most things that unite us apart from every other continent. I don't know. I stand to be corrected. Anybody else can please contribute to this. Your Excellency, do you have something to say, particularly to this one, in terms of what unites us as a continent?
Thank you very much.
Right.
Before this documents and all that, as African states, like we always say, we didn't even have borders. So we used to move in and out, and we do our businesses, and we have families across and all that. So really, we have so much in common. It's just that we don't document a lot of things, and we don't also we don't follow through with some of the developments we've gained through our interconnectedness. Today we talk about migration and a lot of people make noise, but practically you realize that African states, the migration is more within than going to Europe and all that. Even in Ghana, you would realize that there are so many Nigerians in Ghana. You realize that there are so many Ghanaians in Nigeria. And these are people who have families, they are living there, they are going about their businesses and all that. You understand? Just in Togo, you have it. You have students coming from Liberia and other things to Ghana for education. You have the Francophone countries coming for education. You know, there's so much going on, but these are not things that we are really consciously putting together. When it comes to health tourism, people move across from country to country, I mean, within the African sub-region to, I mean, do all these things. So we have so much in common, but then it's not structured. So most of the time we think there isn't much going on, but practically there is. And I believe that this agenda is now going to, I mean, formally bring these things together in a more cohesive manner. So I believe that we have so much in common. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Your Excellency, for your contribution. Much appreciated. And yes, I really do think that we have a lot in common. I don't know. I mean, I didn't think of the question, but yes, I think we do. There are two hands up. We'll call them, and then we'll have to be getting ready to bring the meeting to a successful close. Mimi, you have your hand up, please.
Thank you very much. Great presentations. I have a couple of questions. First of all, Dr. Siao, I think there are questions in the chats for you specifically, so please answer them. My second question, the whole point I was asking about globalization and modernization. I know that the world is becoming more of a global village where we are communicating, we are using technology, we are advancing. People in Africa are able to sell their products online, like on TikTok and Instagram, and they're able to ship it. People from Africa able to patronize stuff from overseas and all of that. To some extent, is good. But looking at the whole African Union and the agenda and promoting African unity, what we stand for and all of that, is this a blessing in disguise? Is this an advantage or disadvantage? Really, because we've become so modernized. Now in African schools, you can't even beat children anymore. Where do we draw the line? We want to push Africa. We want to make Africa obvious. But how do we do that without allowing the system to be infiltrated by the white or by the Western world? I mean, by the Western world and what they stand for. Because I think Dr. Sia made a statement that in everything everything going on in Africa, when there's some conflict, whatever, there's always this Western country behind something, pushing some lines or pushing some dots, some buttons. So where do we draw the line? Where do we say that this is it? We are going to draw on technology, we are going to draw on AI, we are going to advance the African agenda, but we are still going to remain our authentic self without losing ourselves to gain the influence or to get the graces that we are hoping to get from the Western world. And back to the question that you just asked the honorable representation of Liberia about what we have in common. I believe that apart from our culture, yes, we do still have a lot in common, but he's saying that migration is common within African countries, and people are, for example, Nigerians and Liberians are coming to Ghana to study. Somebody did put in the comment section that's for greener pastures, and it's true. They only come to Ghana to study because probably they think that Ghana is better. Or people are going to Nigeria to work because they think Nigeria is better. It's the same way people leave Ghana and come to France or to Europe. So it's really about finding something more beyond what their country is able to offer. And that is why everybody seems to be moving from one country to the other, one continent to the other. And not because we really do have anything to offer. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Siao, you answered that, but I think there's another question for you. And then whilst you answer Miriam's one, maybe His Excellency would make some clearance on his comments before about what's his understanding of how we are connected to, and then Shogu can also say something. But somebody says that I think a lot of people are beginning to agree that we do not share a lot in common. Mockingbird says, besides our shared pain and corrupt leaders, there's nothing really that unites. South Africa has reached a record high of unemployment, some same drama everywhere. Incompetence is the most pervasive description we'd had yet. You see, let me turn my camera on and say this. Why are you people harsh to Africa? You are too harsh to Africa. But yeah, that's fine. And Professor Siam, please answer the questions that are addressed to you. Then His Excellency would make the clarification he needs to make on what he meant by we are united, the immigration thing. I think he's being misinterpreted, and then Shogu would give a comment and then we'll bring the session to a close.
Yeah, so the comment of modernization and globalization, I think, yeah, they are very linked. And that goes back to the comment you made about the fact that there are a lot of people who outside, I mean, non-Africans who are actually learning a lot about Africa. But then the point is, what are we giving out there and what are we receiving? If we are receiving things that are not beneficial to our system, then it doesn't matter what we are giving out there. We are still going to be at a worse. We are still going to be worse off than we started. So then, even about the fact that we are able to sell ourselves, I think we need to begin by selling ourselves within Africa first. Because how many Africans know about Africa? Like we a lot of us didn't. I for one didn't know a lot about Africa. I knew about Ghana, but then I didn't know a lot about other African countries. It's quite more expensive to travel to another African country than to travel to an European country. So there are a lot of things that are happening in this so-called globalized era that is still very much going against Africa. And when Mimi talked about modernity, I was thinking about modernization theory because that's also linked because of the idea that which is linked to the question about competence, according to the neoliberal approach to development, as an African continent, our development is supposed to be a linear one. So we move from a traditional society to an age of high mass consumption. So we need to follow that linear neoliberal approach. But then the idea also is that is not true because then we all cannot follow one developmental pattern. And that's one challenge I have with this framework again, because then it's almost like the framework is trying to fit into sustainable development goals. It is trying to fit into millennium development, which is something I find problematic because then a lot of these goals and a lot of these development approaches are actually if I want to be a conspiracy theorist, are actually not really things that are going to make us develop in the end. Because in terms of competence, to answer the competency question, Africans are competent. But then for a developing country, you need not expose yourself to unequal competition. It's like exposing a 2-year-old boy or girl to fight a 50-year-old man. They will get defeated. And there is nowhere in history where a country has been able to develop, or a continent has been able to develop without protecting their local infant industries. And that is the opportunity that Africa is not getting right now. All these arrangements and European agreements and other agreements with other countries are consistently making African industries and companies very much die out of the competition. And it's not because they are not competent, it's just because they are not being protected. They need that protection. And the US, UK, Germany, all these countries protected their industries before opening themselves up for competition. And that is what we have to do for African industry. So basically, yes, we are competent, but then competency doesn't mean that you can also open yourself up. We need protection. We need to grow to a certain level before we can compete. And that's one of the reasons why Nkrumah and the other nationalist leaders were very much afraid of what they call the balkanization of African continent, because once they split us into little countries, it's very easy to overcome us. And the only way we could actually do better was for us all to come together, because once we are bigger, it's easier to relate with with the rest of the world. And Germany, for instance, or US will not invite us for an African conference in the US. No, it won't happen. We are going to invite them in Africa. But now they invite us there and tell us what to do and we book flight tickets, go and come back, which is not good. But then that is essentially what that opening up of our system has done to a lot of industries and companies. But then in terms of competency, I really believe we are competent. And actually, we've also not talked about the fact that the AU headquarters probably was also built by China. So then if you are actually pushing for African agency and you cannot even build your own house, what sort of agency are you looking for? So yeah.
I did not need to interrupt you. They didn't only build the whole institution, they actually put in the security systems. So whatever communication that went on, exactly, whatever communication that went on in the African Union, it was going straight to China. Can you imagine? What are we even talking about here? It's embarrassing. Okay, Your Excellency, please, I think you need to make some clarification on what you said about migration. It's causing a lot of stir.
Okay, so before I delve into that, I also want to get the question very clear. The question was what do we have in common, and the common, what does it mean? So if you can throw more light on it so that at least I can address it very well.
Okay, I don't think she's on now. Shogu, if you have something to say regarding globalization, modernization, or the idea that the only thing we have in common as Africans is corrupt politicians and bad governance.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Mimi, for your questions. They're definitely very thought-provoking. Particularly a question on, preserving African culture. I think that is very important and that we are losing it. And you're asking, is it an advantage or a disadvantage to have this globalization currently? So as Dr. Siam has already talked about, he talked about economic protectionism, and that is so important to protect the economic future. But to your question, I would say we need some cultural protectionism as well. So I don't know how many of us actually in the next 10, 20, 30 years will have our kids and our children speaking their local languages. To what extent are we preserving our own culture? Our own language is disappearing because if we divide even Africa according to colonialism, a lot of people today would rather speak English or French than their local language because they believe that is more prosperous for them. And this already, we are starting off on a wrong foot. Even the issue of the education we have today, how much, and Dr. Siam has talked about it a bit as well, how much of African education is integrated there. Even if you're not studying African studies, even if you're studying medicine, engineering, social studies, whatever you're studying, there should still be an aspect of looking at it from an African perspective. Looking at, even when I was in secondary school or university, a lot of our books were written and imported from outside. Who was giving the African perspective? And little by little, we have eroded what it means to be African. Now, we're not even talking about, formal education. We're even talking about erosion of our cultural values, because then we look at what happens today on TV. We opt not for Africa to support African media, but to support external ones. And little by little, the subliminal message that's passing is that one is more valuable than the other. And hence, there's investment in one more than the other. And this is how it happens. So we do need to protect our culture. So look for some cultural protectionism. Celebrate our culture in a way that also elevates what it means to be African. So that anytime we look online, anytime we don't necessarily have, right now, there can be or potentially can be some negative connotations when we talk about African. This needs to be changed on a cultural level if we really want to be authentic with ourselves. Because as was said in the beginning, Africa is home and we don't have a second continent. So we should treasure the one we have and protect it. The last thing, or the third thing I would say is regarding brain drain and a lot of Africans that move abroad. Yes, this happens. But sometimes I see more unity in Africans abroad than when Africans are in the continent. And this is crazy to me because, again, we are seeking something that is so intrinsic and sometimes you cannot qualify it. but we're still united by that. Shared values, shared history, shared struggles, yes, but that is still a strong enough uniter for us. I would also say, and it was really interesting when Dr. CM talked about the African Union headquarters being built by China. All sorts of monitoring equipment being put there to sort of have the communication transmitted back. We should also be wary, and that's why when we were talking through this conversation, we talked a lot about the West, the West, the West. But China is now the new neocolonizer, and our relations with China are not yet fully defined. It's purely economic now. But as time goes on, a lot of countries are having, debt-linked loans from China, which if they cannot repay, China owns a part of their port, a part of their natural resources. So this colonialism is something we might see from China in the next 10 years. How are we preparing for that? Do we have a system of laws that protect our country from that? We have the One Belt, One Road initiative from China that they're building huge trade flows across different continents, and Africa is their biggest market. How are we leveraging on the fact that we're the biggest market to make sure that Africans are protected? So we do have to be wary and be careful be to some extent, or at least till our economies and industries reach critical mass, to have that economic protectionism, but also to some extent have some cultural protectionism as well before our culture disappears. So thank you so much, Mimi, for that.
Okay, thank you so much, Shogu. That was a very interesting take. I'm trying not to read any more comments, apart from the one that said that leaders are all jokers. Somehow, I just want to put that out there. But yeah, that's fine. I'm trying to end the conversation because when it comes to Africa, we can talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. There's so much to say. There's so many aspects that we need to discuss, so many problems that comes with them, and then so many solutions we want to propose. So if we don't wrap up before we know, we'll be going 2 hours. I mean, we're almost there in 2 hours anyway. So yes, I appreciate the comments, I appreciate the contributions, I appreciate the thoughts. The session was recorded. As many people that want it, please do reach out to myself or Joe. We'll have it to you. I want to extend my deepest appreciation to the 3 panelists, Professor Xiao, His Excellency Nee Thompson, and of course, the beautiful Miss Shogu, for all your contributions and thought. This has been interesting. I have learned a lot, honestly. I think it's been worth the celebration. So many people are celebrating African Day different ways. People are at cultural groups dancing, and we are here having an intellectual conversation. This is also good. Very, very useful. And we hope that one day, everyone on this platform will have a bigger platform, and then these conversations will come to play. Everything we've discussed, we'll be able to put it into practicalization. Thank you all so much.
Yes, this Dijo. So before we go, from Voice One Africa, we want to have Petro from South Africa give a recital.
He's not from South Africa. He's Congolese.
Yes, the Congolese poet in South Africa.
Okay, he's a poet. He's a very renowned poet. Petro, it's an honor to have you. I was just looking at your post on Facebook. You are doing amazing for the continent, and I know very soon we'll be celebrating you like we are celebrating all these European ones that we celebrate. You get a platform to tell the African story as it is. So as we are waiting for him to close us, and then that will be the last part, I want to say thank you to every participant here. I will not try to read the names out because I'll not do justice to some people. Yes, but for every person here, friends, family, people who just had shared interest in the conversation, thank you very, very much. In 2 weeks' time, we have a presentation on Pan-Africanism. It's important. I mean, that has been major concern here. Then maybe later, Dr. Xiang will do one on globalization, and then His Excellency will do one on peace and security. But the next 2 Sundays, we have a presentation by me, yours truly, on Pan-Africanism, the theories and the realities that come with it. Until then, let's make a date. Thank you so much. I know we have church tomorrow, or whatever we believe in. When we do talk to our makers, please let's pray for the continent, because we really cannot run away from it. So thank you all very much. Petro and Joe, I'm handing over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kakra, for the wonderful session. Tonight is a celebration, and I'm going to contribute to the celebration with a little poem that I wrote. It's my original poem, so I'll read it to you. I hope you enjoy it and get something from it. Right? I'll just go on and read. Tumultuous heart, peaceful oceans, ages sailing, sailing across endless sea, on the verge of succumbing, journey improvised, overwhelming escapade, migration unprepaid, dying of thirst and exhaustion, drinking the vinegar of perpetual pain, starving, craving for green pastures from Africa, only deserving meals of bitter melancholy, remembrance of home, fragrance of hope, faces we loved seeing smiling, torture of the daylight, insomnia tastes just delicious, delight in amnesia, nostalgia burns the brain, it scales the spirit, turning the page as much more better texture. The world is now ruled by violence. Diplomacy is worn rust. Peace and freedom is of the past. Silence to unfairness is the present. Revolt are days of human being humane. Now gaze upon the ocean. Our ship is in motion, sailing, sailing, with not a single notion of way next and what next. And the anger is surging. The anchor is not dropping, sailing but sailing, leaving behind traces of reality, innocence, inner sense, and all good sense. For wood cages and mental cages, trailing with us straight and sense of the new worlds, a divided world, divided Africa, new reality, savagery, disunity, inhumanity, boundaries, rivalry, slavery, animosity. For the price of rosary beads, euphoria of life forsaken on the shore of Liberia, rage against ourselves for being ourselves. From Ghana or Nigeria, we are one strong Africa, one common present and one said past, murals of history depicting us in the present, ousting France back to France, and in the past, peacefully marrying the Virgin Mary, wearing a green and a white gown. In the old world, religion made us weak. Strength got us domesticated. Our kindness got us dominated. Sailing, sailing and again sailing. Macabre journey. Innocence dying. Enmity sprouting. Sourness soaring. Salvation dissipating. Winds blowing. We almost died. We survived. We're alive. We rose from the dead in Niamey. We're alive in Bamako. We rose from the dead in Ouagadougou. We're alive in Dakar. We almost died. We're alive. We rose from the dead. We almost died. Thank you.
Wow. Good night, everyone. Good night.